There was a woman who looked in her bathroom mirror and saw something that stopped her completely. Her hair had turned silver, lines traced her eyes like tiny rivers, her skin had softened with time. And then, she smiled. Not a sad smile of resignation, but a deep, genuine smile of recognition, as if she was meeting herself for the very first time. Most of us have the opposite reaction when we see ourselves aging. We feel panic, loss, like something precious is slipping away. But what if everything you believed about getting older was completely backwards? If you're comfortable sharing, drop your listening location in the comments. There's something beautiful about exploring these truths together across the globe. Grab a blanket, find your favorite quiet space, maybe brew some tea. This isn't just information, it's a gentle transformation. What if the lines on your face weren't signs of decay, but evidence of laughter and love? What if your changing body wasn't failing you, but teaching you presence? What if aging wasn't loss to mourn, but gifts to unwrap? For the next 3 hours, we'll explore Buddhist teachings that have transformed how people see aging for over 25 centuries. You'll discover why Zen masters teach that aging doesn't happen to you, it reveals you. Why understanding impermanence is the key to finding peace with every stage of life. The woman in the mirror had learned what the Buddha discovered under the Bodhi tree, that what we call aging is actually awakening. Your transformation begins right now. Long ago, nestled in a valley where cherry blossoms bloomed perpetually, there existed a village where no one ever wanted to grow older. The villagers had discovered a magical spring that promised to keep them looking exactly as they were. Every morning, they would drink from this spring and gaze into its still waters, admiring their unchanged reflections. The village prospered in many ways. People traveled from distant lands just to see these eternally youthful inhabitants. Markets flourished, festivals continued year-round, and laughter echoed through the streets. But something strange began to happen as the seasons turned. The villagers started avoiding anything that might remind them of time's passage. They refused to plant trees that would grow tall. They avoided keeping pets that might age. They stopped visiting elderly relatives in neighboring villages. Most peculiar of all, they began to fear their own shadows, because shadows changed length throughout the day, marking time's relentless movement. Children were born in the village, but as they began to grow and change, their parents would look at them with anxiety rather than wonder. The village library stopped acquiring new books because fresh ideas might suggest that knowledge could accumulate over time. Even their celebrations became hollow. Birthdays were forbidden, anniversaries avoided. The villagers lived in an eternal present that had somehow become a prison rather than a paradise. The most tragic aspect was how they began to treat their own memories. Recalling the past suggested that time had moved, that they had been different once. So they practiced forgetting, avoiding old belongings and stories of earlier times. They became strangers to their own histories, cutting themselves off from the very experiences that had shaped their souls. One day, a traveling Zen monk arrived at the village. His hair was silver, his face lined with years of smiling, his movements deliberate and mindful. The villagers were horrified. "Why haven't you used our magical spring?" they asked. "Don't you want to stay young forever?" The monk observed their question with gentle curiosity. "What is young?" he asked simply. "What is old? Are these qualities that belong to your body or to your mind?" The villagers pointed to his weathered hands, his lined face, his slower gait. "Surely you can see that you're old," they insisted. The monk smiled gently and asked to see this miraculous spring. When they led him to the perfectly still waters, he did something that shocked everyone. He picked up a small stone and dropped it into the center of the spring. Ripples spread outward in perfect circles, distorting every reflection. The villagers gasped in dismay. "You've ruined our eternal images," they cried. But the monk simply sat beside the water and waited. As the ripples gradually calmed, the reflections returned, but they looked different now. More alive somehow, more real. The still water had shown them frozen images, but the moving water revealed something deeper, the constant, beautiful dance of change itself. "Your spring was never magical," the monk explained softly. "It was simply still, and stillness, while peaceful, is not life. Life is movement, change, the ripples that spread when experience touches the surface of existence." But the villagers weren't ready to hear this truth. They waited for the monk to leave, then tried to return to their old ways. However, something had shifted. Now, when they looked into the still water, they could see what they'd been missing. The frozen reflections that had once comforted them now seemed lifeless, like portraits of people who had forgotten how to breathe. And then, something happened that changed everything. What the villagers discovered next would seem impossible until you understand the secret the Buddha found about mirrors 25 centuries ago. The Buddha taught that what we see when we look at ourselves is never just what is actually there. We see through layers of expectation, memory, and desire. We see what we think we should look like, what we used to look like, what we fear we're becoming. But we rarely see what is simply, beautifully, perfectly present. In his teachings on perception, the Buddha explained that the mind creates mental formations, layers of interpretation that obscure direct experience. When we look in a mirror, we're often not seeing our actual face, but rather our accumulated judgments about that face. It's like trying to see clearly through multiple layers of colored glass. Each layer distorts the image until we can no longer perceive what's actually there. In the village, something remarkable began happening. One by one, the inhabitants started seeing their reflections differently. A woman noticed that the lines around her eyes appeared when she laughed, and realized they were maps of joy, not marks of decay. A man observed that his silver hair caught light in ways his darker hair never had, like he was wearing a crown of captured moonbeams. This shift in perception didn't happen overnight. It began with a simple practice the traveling monk had quietly suggested before leaving. He called it mirror meditation, though it was unlike any meditation they'd ever heard of. "Look into any reflective surface," he had whispered to those willing to listen. "But instead of judging what you see, simply observe. Notice without naming. See without comparing. Watch your face as if you were seeing a human being for the very first time. The practice was deceptively simple, but profoundly challenging. Most people had spent decades looking at themselves with automatic criticism. To look without judgment required unwiring years of conditioning. But gradually, with patient practice, they learned to see with what Buddhists call beginner's mind, fresh, curious, without preconceptions. The first person brave enough to try this was a baker who had spent years avoiding her reflection entirely. She approached her shop window early one morning when the glass was clear and still. Instead of her usual critical assessment, she simply looked. What she saw astounded her. Her face held stories she'd never noticed, the slight upturn at the corners of her mouth from years of greeting customers warmly, the gentle crow's feet that appeared when she concentrated on perfecting her bread recipes, the soft strength in her jaw that spoke of someone who had weathered difficulties and emerged with grace. For the first time in years, she felt beautiful, not because she looked young, but because she looked real, authentic, like someone who had actually lived. Word of her experience spread quietly through the village. Others began experimenting with this new way of seeing. A carpenter noticed how his calloused hands told the story of every beautiful thing he had built. A teacher saw how her patient expression had been carved by years of helping children understand difficult concepts. They discovered that the magical spring had been showing them illusions, frozen, lifeless versions of themselves that never changed, never grew, never accumulated wisdom. But their actual reflections told stories of resilience, love, experience, and gradual awakening. The Buddhist teaching behind this transformation is called right view, one of the steps on the Noble Eightfold Path. It means seeing things as they actually are, rather than through the filter of our desires and fears. When applied to aging, right view reveals something profound. Every change in your appearance is evidence of life fully lived. Try this now, if you're willing. Find any reflective surface, a window, a phone screen, even a spoon. Look at your reflection without your usual internal commentary. Don't judge, compare, or wish it were different. Simply observe this face that has carried you through every experience of your life. Notice the unique combination of features that belongs only to you. See the evidence of every smile, every concern, every moment of concentration or compassion. What you're seeing is not decay. What you're seeing is accumulated wisdom made visible, the external manifestation of an internal journey, the physical proof that you have been brave enough to keep living, learning, and growing. But there's something even more beautiful than what we see. The villagers' transformation didn't stop with accepting their reflections. Something deeper was awakening, an understanding that beauty itself had been completely redefined by their new way of seeing. A master potter lived at the edge of the village, and she became the unexpected teacher of this deeper truth. For decades, she had created vessels of extraordinary beauty, smooth, perfectly symmetrical, gleaming with flawless glazes. Her pottery was prized throughout the region for its technical perfection. But as she herself began to change with time, so did her art. Her hands, once steady as stone, now trembled slightly, This trembling created something unexpected in her pottery, subtle irregularities that caught light in surprising ways. Her glazes, applied with less precise control, developed patterns she could never have planned. Her forms, shaped by hands that moved more slowly, took on an organic quality that seemed to breathe with life. At first, she was frustrated. These pieces didn't match her lifelong standards of perfection. But then people began responding to her new work in ways that surprised her completely. They would hold her latest creations and say, "These feel alive, like they have souls." One day, a young apprentice asked her what had changed in her technique. The potter reflected for a long moment before answering. "I stopped trying to control every outcome," she said quietly. "I started collaborating with my limitations instead of fighting them. The tremor in my hands taught me about spontaneity. My slowing pace taught me about patience. My changing vision taught me to feel my way toward beauty instead of calculating it." This potter had discovered what Zen Buddhism calls wabi-sabi, the profound beauty found in imperfection, impermanence, and incompleteness. In Japanese aesthetics, the most treasured objects are often those that show their age, their history, their relationship with time. A tea bowl with a crack that has been mended with gold is considered more beautiful than one that has never been broken. A garden that changes with the seasons is more valued than one that remains static year-round. The same principle applies to human beauty. The face that shows no evidence of living is like a blank canvas, technically perfect, but emotionally empty. But the face that carries traces of every season of life tells a story worth reading. Each line is a sentence. Each change in texture is a paragraph. Each silver hair is punctuation marking another chapter of experience. The Buddha spoke of this when he taught about the 3 marks of existence. Everything in life is characterized by impermanence, suffering, and non-self. But rather than making life meaningless, these characteristics make it infinitely precious. A sunset is beautiful precisely because it won't last forever. A flower moves us because it will eventually fade. And human beings become more beautiful as they accumulate the evidence of having truly lived. Think about the most beautiful older person you've ever encountered. What made them beautiful? Was it their smooth skin or perfect features? Or was it something deeper, the way their eyes held kindness earned through years of both joy and sorrow? The way their voice carried warmth seasoned by countless conversations? The way their presence suggested someone who had learned to find peace amid life's inevitable changes? This is the beauty that time creates. Not the surface beauty of youth, which is lovely but temporary, but the soul beauty of experience, which deepens with every passing year. It's the difference between a photograph and a painting. One captures a moment, the other reveals layers of meaning that unfold the longer you look. The villagers eventually abandoned their magical spring entirely. Not because they had given up on beauty, but because they had discovered a more profound kind of beauty, the kind that grows richer with time instead of fading with it. They learned to see their changing faces as evidence of lives courageously lived, not youth carelessly lost. But the real transformation happens when we look beyond the mirror entirely, to understand what our changing bodies are actually teaching us about presence, gratitude, and the art of being fully alive. Because your body, this faithful companion, that has carried you through every experience, has wisdom that goes far deeper than any reflection could ever reveal. And that's where our journey takes us next. In the mountains of ancient China, there stood a temple that had been built over 800 years ago. Travelers would journey for weeks just to witness something extraordinary about this place. It had never been renovated, never been restored, yet it seemed to grow more beautiful with each passing century. The temple's wooden beams had darkened to a rich ebony that gleamed like polished stone. Its roof tiles had developed a patina of green and gold that shifted color with the changing light. The stone steps leading to the entrance had been worn smooth by countless pilgrims, creating gentle curves that felt perfect beneath traveling feet. Moss had claimed portions of the walls, creating living tapestries that changed with the seasons. What puzzled visitors most was how this aging structure could feel so alive, so vital, when newer temples in the valley below seemed somehow lifeless, despite their fresh paint and pristine condition. The answer lay in something the monks called collaborative aging, the art of working with time rather than against it. The original builders had understood something profound about impermanence. They had chosen materials that would become more beautiful as they weathered. They had designed spaces that would improve as they settled. They had created a structure that was meant to age, to change, to develop character through its relationship with wind, rain, sun, and snow. Master Chen, the temple's eldest monk, would often sit with visitors and explain the philosophy behind this approach. Most people build things trying to stop time, he would say in his gentle voice. They use materials that resist change, designs that fight against nature's desire to transform everything it touches. But we built this temple to dance with time, to become partners with the elements. He would gesture to the darkened wooden pillars that supported the main hall. These beams were light when we were young. Each year, they have absorbed a little more history, a little more character. They are stronger now than when they were first cut, more beautiful than when they were first carved. They have learned to flex with the wind instead of breaking, to expand and contract with the seasons instead of cracking. The monks had discovered something that modern medicine is only beginning to understand, that the human body, like their temple, is designed not just to age, but to age wisely. Every cell in your body is constantly rebuilding itself, adapting to new conditions, learning from experience. Your immune system becomes more sophisticated with exposure to challenges. Your neural pathways deepen and multiply through use. Your heart grows stronger through the work of loving. But there was more to the temple's secret than just acceptance of change. The monks had learned to read the language their aging structure spoke to them. When certain stones began to shift, they didn't panic or try to force them back into perfect alignment. Instead, they listened to what the movement was telling them about the foundation, about drainage patterns, about the natural settling that needed to occur. They responded with gentle adjustments rather than violent interventions. The temple teaches us how to age, Master Chen would explain, not by fighting change, but by understanding what each change is trying to teach us. When the roof begins to sag slightly, we don't immediately rebuild it. We ask what it needs, perhaps better support here, perhaps less weight there. We collaborate with the aging process instead of declaring war against it. One spring, a wealthy merchant visited the temple and was appalled by what he saw as its deteriorated condition. "Master," he said to Chen, "I could fund a complete restoration. We could make this temple look exactly as it did when it was first built. We could erase every sign of age, every mark of time." Master Chen smiled and invited the merchant to sit with him in meditation for an hour. When they finished, he asked a simple question. "After sitting in this space, do you feel more peaceful or less peaceful than when you arrived?" "More peaceful," the merchant admitted. "Much more peaceful. There's something about this place that calms my mind immediately." "And do you think that peace comes from the temple's perfection?" Chen asked gently, "or from its acceptance of imperfection? Do you feel calm because everything here is new and controlled, or because everything here has learned to be at peace with change?" The merchant sat quietly for a long moment, looking around at the weathered beauty surrounding him. Suddenly he understood. The temple's power didn't come from its resistance to time, but from its harmony with time. It had achieved something beyond preservation. It had achieved grace. What the monks discovered will change how you see your own body forever. They realized that fighting against physical changes creates tension, stress, and suffering. But collaborating with those changes, listening to what they're teaching, responding with wisdom rather than fear, creates something beautiful, a body that ages with grace, strength, and increasing harmony with itself. Your body is not deteriorating. It's not betraying you. It's not failing. Like that ancient temple, it's learning, adapting, developing new forms of beauty and wisdom that are only possible through the passage of time. But to understand this fully, we need to hear what your body has been trying to tell you all along. What if you could sit down with your body and have an honest conversation? What if, instead of the usual complaints and criticisms, you could actually listen to what it's been trying to tell you through every ache, every change, every new limitation or unexpected strength? There's a meditation practice that Buddhist teachers have used for centuries called body dialogue, treating your physical form not as an object you possess, but as a wise friend who has been with you through every moment of your life. Imagine, if you will, that your body could speak. What would it want you to know? What wisdom has it gained from carrying you through decades of experience? Thank you, your body might begin, for finally listening. I've been trying to communicate with you for so long, but you've been so busy judging my changes that you haven't heard what I've actually been saying. Do you remember when you were young and you expected me to do everything perfectly, immediately, without rest or consideration? I did my best to meet those expectations. I ran when you demanded speed, lifted when you demanded strength, stayed awake when you demanded alertness. I adapted to every diet you tried, every exercise routine you started and abandoned, every stress you put me through. I never complained when you took me for granted. When you ignored my signals for rest, I found ways to keep going. When you fed me poorly, I worked harder to extract nutrition from whatever you offered. When you held stress in my muscles for months at a time, I found ways to compensate, to protect your vital organs, to keep you functioning. Now, as I change and slow down, you see it as failure. But what if I told you these changes are actually gifts? What if slowing down is my way of teaching you presence? What if aching joints are my way of encouraging you to move more mindfully? What if needing more rest is my way of giving you permission to embrace stillness? This isn't fantasy or imagination. The Buddha taught that the body is one of our greatest teachers, if we learn to listen to it with respect rather than resentment. In the Satipatthana Sutta, he described a practice of mindful awareness of the body that involves developing a relationship with your physical form based on gratitude, curiosity, and profound respect for its wisdom. I am not the same body you were born with. Your body might continue. Every cell has been replaced multiple times. I am literally made new every few years, but each time I rebuild myself, I incorporate the lessons of our shared experiences. These lines on our face, they're my way of holding the memory of every smile, every worry, every expression of love or concern. These changes in muscle and bone, they're evidence of every challenge I've helped you overcome. The heart that beats in our chest has pumped millions of gallons of blood to keep you alive. These lungs have taken hundreds of millions of breaths to sustain your consciousness. These hands have touched countless faces, created beautiful things, offered comfort to others. These feet have carried you through thousands of miles of living. How can you call any of this failure? How can you see any of this as loss? Buddhist teaching recognizes the body as one of the 4 foundations of mindfulness, not something to transcend or escape, but something to understand and appreciate. The goal isn't to become detached from physical experience, but to develop what's called skillful relationship with it. This means seeing your body as a partner in consciousness, rather than an obstacle to it. I am trying to teach you something that can only be learned through time, your body might say. I am showing you that strength isn't just about force, it's about endurance, adaptation, the ability to find new ways of being powerful. I am demonstrating that beauty isn't just about surface appearance, it's about the grace that comes from moving through life with acceptance and wisdom. When I move more slowly now, I am teaching you to savor each movement. When I need more rest, I am showing you the profound peace that comes from true relaxation. When I can't do certain things I used to do easily, I am helping you discover capabilities you never knew you had. Patience, creativity, the ability to ask for help, the wisdom to choose what truly matters. The revolutionary aspect of this conversation isn't just emotional, it's practical. When you start listening to your body with respect instead of criticism, everything changes. You begin to notice the difference between discomfort that signals a need for attention and discomfort that signals natural change. You learn to respond to physical challenges with curiosity rather than fear. You discover that many of the limitations of aging are actually invitations to develop new forms of strength and wisdom. I need you to understand, your body might conclude, that I am not aging despite you. I am aging with you. Every change I undergo is a change we undergo together. I am not separate from your consciousness, your spirit, your essence. I am the physical expression of your journey through time. And just as a musical instrument becomes more beautiful in tone as it ages and is played with love, I become more beautiful as we learn to move through life together with acceptance, gratitude, and grace. This understanding transforms not just how you see your body, but how you inhabit it. Instead of fighting against physical changes, you begin to dance with them. Instead of mourning what you can no longer do, you become curious about what new capabilities are emerging. Instead of seeing aging as decline, you recognize it as evolution, your body's ongoing project of becoming more wise, more adapted, more perfectly itself. But there's something even more remarkable about this new relationship with your body. As you learn to work with your physical changes instead of against them, you discover that what the world calls limitation might actually be a different kind of power altogether. In a monastery high in the Himalayas, there lived a monk who had become famous throughout the region for his extraordinary strength. Pilgrims would travel for weeks to witness him carry massive stones, chop wood with tremendous force, and work in the gardens from dawn until dusk without showing fatigue. But as the seasons turned and the monk aged, something began to change. His movements became more deliberate, his pace more measured. Visitors who had heard stories of his legendary strength were sometimes disappointed when they saw him moving slowly, carefully, with what appeared to be less power than the tales had promised. One day, a young martial artist came to the monastery specifically to challenge this aging monk. "I've heard you were once strong," the young man said with barely concealed arrogance. "But I can see that age has taken your power. Perhaps it's time for you to step aside and let someone younger take your place." The old monk smiled gently and invited the young man to join him in his daily work. "Let's carry water from the well to the garden," he suggested. "We'll see what strength really means." The young martial artist grabbed 2 large buckets and rushed to the well, filling them to the brim. He lifted them with impressive force and began walking quickly toward the garden, determined to show his superiority. The monk filled his buckets only halfway and began walking slowly, steadily, with perfect balance. At first, the young man surged ahead, covering twice the distance in half the time. But then something interesting began to happen. The weight of his full buckets started to strain his arms. His quick pace began to tire his legs. Water sloshed over the sides, soaking his clothes and making the buckets even heavier. By the time he reached the garden, he was exhausted. His buckets were only half full, and he had wasted most of the water along the way. The monk arrived several minutes later, moving at the same steady pace he had maintained from the beginning. His buckets were still exactly half full. Not a drop had been spilled. He looked refreshed rather than tired, centered rather than stressed. While the young man collapsed in exhaustion, the monk calmly began watering the plants with movements that seemed like a meditation in motion. "I don't understand," the young martial artist said, genuinely puzzled. "You moved so slowly, yet you accomplished more than I did. You seemed to use less effort, yet you were more effective. How is this possible?" The monk sat beside him in the shade of a large tree. "When I was young like you," he said kindly, "I thought strength meant forcing my way through tasks as quickly and powerfully as possible. I wasted enormous amounts of energy fighting against gravity, against balance, against the natural rhythm of work. I was strong, but I was not efficient. I was fast, but I was not effective. But my body has taught me something different as it has changed," he continued. "It has shown me that true strength lies not in force, but in understanding. Not in speed, but in sustainability. Not in fighting against limitations, but in working with them so skillfully that they become advantages. He gestured to his hands, weathered and lined but still steady. These hands can no longer grip with the crushing force they once had. But they have learned to hold things with exactly the right amount of pressure, enough to maintain control, not so much as to waste energy or cause strain. This is a kind of strength that young hands, for all their power, cannot achieve. The monk's teaching points to something that Western culture often misses about aging, the development of what Buddhists call effortless effort. This is the ability to accomplish more by trying less, to be more effective by being more conscious, to find power in precision rather than force. Watch a master calligrapher, the monk suggested. The young student presses hard on the brush, trying to control every stroke through muscular tension. The master barely seems to touch the paper, yet creates lines of perfect beauty and strength. The difference is not in the power of their hands, but in their understanding of how to work with the brush, the ink, the paper, and gravity itself. This principle applies to every aspect of aging. As your body changes, it's not losing strength, it's developing a different kind of strength. The strength of knowing exactly how much effort is needed and no more. The strength of moving in harmony with your physical reality rather than fighting against it. The strength of conservation, precision, and profound awareness of how energy flows through your system. I can no longer carry the heaviest stones, the monk admitted to his young visitor, but I have learned to move them using leverage, patience, and understanding of balance. Often, I can accomplish what used to require brute force by simply taking more time and thinking more clearly about the task. This is not weakness disguised as wisdom. This is a form of strength that can only develop through experience. The Buddha spoke of this when he taught about the middle way, the path between extreme indulgence and extreme deprivation. As your body ages, it naturally guides you toward this middle path. You learn to work with your energy rather than squandering it. You discover that doing less can sometimes accomplish more. You find power in pause, strength in stillness, effectiveness in effortlessness. The young body is like a powerful river in flood, the monk explained. It has tremendous force, but much of that energy is wasted, scattered, unfocused. The aging body is like a deep, calm river. It moves more slowly, but every drop of water goes exactly where it needs to go. Nothing is wasted. Every movement has purpose. Every action is aligned with intention. This understanding completely reframes what we mean by physical decline. Your body isn't becoming weaker, it's becoming wiser. It's teaching you to accomplish what needs to be done without the wasteful expenditure of energy that characterizes youth. It's showing you how to find the most direct path to any goal, how to work with natural forces rather than against them, how to achieve maximum effectiveness with minimum effort. The young martial artist spent 3 months at the monastery, learning this new understanding of strength. When he finally left, he moved differently, not slower, exactly, but more consciously. Not weaker, but more efficient. Not less powerful, but more wise about when and how to use his power. "I came here thinking I would teach an old man about strength," he told the monk on his departure day. "Instead, you taught me that I knew nothing about strength at all. You showed me that what I called power was often just waste, and what I thought was weakness was actually mastery. This is the secret your aging body has been trying to reveal to you. Every limitation is an invitation to discover a more skillful way of moving through the world. Every change is an opportunity to develop new forms of capability. Every challenge is a chance to learn what the monk learned, that true strength lies not in forcing your way through life, but in finding the path of least resistance that leads exactly where you need to go." But this wisdom about physical strength is just the beginning. Because as your body teaches you about effortless effort, your relationships begin to transform in equally profound ways. The same principles that help you work with your changing physical reality also reveal new ways of connecting with others and new understandings about the natural rhythms of human connection across a lifetime. And that's the next part of our journey together. There was once a woman who loved dinner parties more than almost anything else in the world. Every month, she would prepare elaborate meals and invite the same group of friends, 8 people who had been gathering around her table for over 15 years. They called themselves the Circle, and they believed their bond was unbreakable. The dinner table itself was a beautiful oak rectangle that could comfortably seat 10. She had inherited it from her grandmother, and it had become the heart of her home. Every month, she would set it with her finest dishes, light candles, and wait for her friends to fill every chair with laughter and conversation. But something began to shift, so gradually that she almost didn't notice it at first. One friend moved across the country for a new job and couldn't make the monthly gatherings anymore. Another couple in the group divorced, and the dynamics became so uncomfortable that they both stopped coming. A third friend became consumed with caring for an aging parent and rarely had free evenings. Within 2 years, the circle had shrunk from 8 people to 4. The woman found herself setting fewer places, pushing the remaining diners closer together around the big table. The conversations, once so lively they lasted until midnight, now felt forced and filled with long silences. She began to question everything. Had she done something wrong? Why couldn't things just stay the way they had always been? The remaining friends tried to recapture the old magic. They talked about the absent members constantly, sharing updates and expressing hope that everyone would reunite soon. They even attempted to recruit new people, but the newcomers felt like imposters in a story that had already been written. The dinner parties began to feel like memorial services for a friendship that had died. One evening, after a particularly awkward gathering, where only 3 people showed up, the woman sat alone at her grandmother's table and wept. She felt like she was losing more than friends. She was losing her identity as someone who brought people together. That's when she remembered something her grandmother had once told her about this very table. "This table has seen so many different groups of people," her grandmother had said. "When I was young, it was surrounded by siblings and cousins during holidays. As a young mother, it hosted neighborhood families for potluck dinners. When your grandfather and I grew older, it became a place for book clubs and bridge groups. Near the end, it was just the 2 of us, sharing quiet meals and deep conversations. The table never changed, her grandmother had continued, but the people around it constantly changed. And that's how I learned that the magic was never in keeping the same people forever. The magic was in being open to whoever needed a place to sit, whenever they needed to sit there. Suddenly, the woman understood something that would transform her entire understanding of human connection. She had been trying to preserve a specific configuration of relationships, like a photograph that never changes. But relationships, like everything else in Buddhist understanding, are characterized by impermanence. Fighting against this creates suffering. Accepting it creates freedom. The Buddha taught that attachment to outcomes, including relationships remaining exactly as they are, is one of the primary sources of human suffering. Trying to hold on to changing things is like trying to grasp water in your hands. The tighter you squeeze, the more quickly it flows away. But when you hold your hands loosely, cupped and open, the water can rest there peacefully. The woman began experimenting with this understanding. Instead of trying to recreate the circle exactly as it had been, she opened her dinner parties to anyone who needed community. She invited neighbors, colleagues who seemed lonely, acquaintances going through difficult times. She stopped setting a fixed number of places and kept extra chairs nearby, ready for whoever showed up. What happened next surprised her completely. The dinner parties became more alive than they had ever been. New stories were shared, different perspectives offered, unexpected connections formed. The conversations were richer because they weren't constrained by familiar patterns of the same group repeating the same dynamics. Most importantly, she stopped feeling abandoned by the friends who had moved on. She began to understand that their departure wasn't a rejection of her or a failure of friendship. It was simply the natural flow of life, people coming together when they need each other, moving apart when their paths diverge. The Buddhist concept of non-attachment doesn't mean not caring about people. It means loving them without needing to control how that love expresses itself over time. It means understanding that the end of one kind of relationship often makes space for new kinds of relationships to begin. But there's a hidden gift in this understanding that most people miss. When you stop trying to preserve relationships in their current form, you actually free them to evolve into something deeper and more authentic. And that's exactly what this woman discovered when she learned to embrace the changing nature of human connection. 6 months after transforming her approach to dinner parties, the woman decided to host a casual garden party to celebrate spring blooming season. Unlike her carefully planned dinners, people could come and go as they pleased, bring friends or family, stay for an hour or the entire afternoon. She sent open invitations to everyone she knew, including the original members of the circle. To her surprise, nearly everyone came. The friend who had moved across the country was visiting and stopped by. The divorced couple both attended at different times, eliminating awkwardness. The woman caring for her aging parent brought her mother along, who turned out to be a delightful storyteller. New friends mingled with old ones, creating conversations that never would have happened in the rigid dinner structure. But the most profound moment came when she found herself sitting quietly with Sarah, one of the original circle members, who had become distant over the past year. They hadn't had a real conversation in months. "I need to tell you something," Sarah said quietly. "I've been pulling away from the dinner parties, and I know you've noticed. The truth is, I felt like I was disappointing everyone by not being the same person I used to be." "What do you mean?" the woman asked, confused. "5 years ago, when we started the circle, I was the one who always had funny stories about dating disasters and career adventures," Sarah explained. "I was single, spontaneous, the entertaining one who brought energy and laughter to every gathering. But my life has changed," she continued. "I'm in a stable relationship now, thinking about settling down, maybe having children. My priorities have shifted. I find myself more interested in quiet conversations about meaningful things than in telling amusing anecdotes. I felt like I was letting everyone down by becoming more serious, more introspective." The woman felt a wave of recognition. "Oh, Sarah," she said softly, "I think we've all been trapped in these roles we created for ourselves when we were younger. We've been trying to preserve not just our friendships, but specific versions of ourselves within those friendships." This conversation revealed something the Buddha taught extensively about identity and change. We often cling not just to relationships, but to the roles we play within them. We become attached to being the funny one or the responsible one, and when our natural evolution takes us in different directions, we feel like we're betraying both ourselves and our friends. "What if," the woman suggested, "we've all been changing, but we've been so afraid of disappointing each other that none of us has been honest about who we're becoming?" They gathered the original circle members who were at the party and had a conversation unlike any they'd ever had. Instead of trying to recreate their old dynamic, they talked about who they were now, what they needed now, what they were curious about now. What emerged was extraordinary. The friend who had moved admitted she'd been lonely and missed deep friendships, but had been afraid to be vulnerable. The divorced man revealed he was discovering parts of himself he'd never explored, and wanted friends who could witness his growth without judgment. The woman caring for her parent shared that the experience was teaching her profound lessons about patience and presence. Instead of mourning the old version of their friendship, they became curious about what the new version could be. They realized they had all been trying to preserve something that was meant to evolve, like trying to keep a butterfly in its cocoon. "Maybe," said Sarah, her voice full of wonder, "the reason our old dinners felt so forced lately is that we were all outgrowing that version of ourselves, but none of us wanted to admit it." The Buddhist teaching of right relationship suggests that healthy connections are characterized not by static harmony, but by the ability to grow and change together. This doesn't mean relationships never end. Sometimes people grow in directions that naturally lead them apart. But many relationships that seem to be dying are actually just asking to be reborn in a new form. They decided to continue gathering quarterly for evolution conversations, deeper discussions about who they were becoming, what they were learning, what they needed support with. They would be honest about their capacity for connection, their changing needs, their different priorities. The first of these new gatherings was unlike anything they'd experienced together. Instead of surface-level catching up, they shared real struggles and genuine growth. They talked about aging parents and changing bodies and shifting dreams. They discussed spiritual questions and existential concerns they'd never felt safe exploring before. "It's like we've finally become real friends," one of them observed, "instead of just playing the roles of friends." This evolution taught them something crucial about aging and friendship. The relationships that survive and thrive as we get older aren't necessarily the ones that stay the same. They're the ones that have enough flexibility to grow, enough honesty to admit when change is needed, and enough love to weather the temporary awkwardness of transformation. Most importantly, they learn that letting relationships evolve doesn't mean losing them. It means discovering what was always there beneath the surface roles, the deeper connection that can only emerge when people feel free to be authentically themselves. This discovery opened their eyes to something even more profound about human connection across a lifetime. 3 years later, the woman made a discovery that would forever change how she understood relationships. It began while helping a neighbor who had fallen and injured her hip. In the hospital waiting room, she struck up a conversation with another visitor who seemed familiar somehow. After a few minutes, they realized they had a mutual friend, someone from the original circle who had moved away years ago. But as they continued talking, the connections multiplied in ways that seemed almost magical. The hospital visitors' book club had been started by someone who attended one of the garden parties. Her volunteer work had been inspired by a conversation with Sarah during an evolution gathering. Her interest in meditation had developed after meeting someone at the dinner parties who had shared a Buddhist teaching. Even her current friendship with a yoga instructor could be traced back to connections that originated at the dining room table. "It's like we're all connected by invisible threads," the woman mused. "Even when we think relationships have ended, they keep creating new connections, new possibilities, new forms of influence we never see." This sparked her curiosity. Over the following months, she began paying attention to these invisible networks in her own life. She discovered that friends who had drifted away were still influencing her daily existence in countless subtle ways. A book recommendation from someone she hadn't spoken to in years had led to a new interest in photography. Values and perspectives she'd absorbed from past friendships had become so integrated into her thinking that she barely remembered where they'd originated. She realized that her grief over lost friendships had been based on a fundamental misunderstanding of how human connection actually works. She'd been thinking of relationships like physical objects, things you either possess or lose. But relationships are more like energy. They transform rather than disappear, influence rather than just exist, ripple outward in ways that continue long after the original connection has changed form. The Buddhist teaching of interdependence suddenly made perfect sense. Everything is connected to everything else. Every person you meet influences who you become. Every conversation leaves traces that affect future conversations. Every relationship, no matter how brief or how it ends, contributes to the vast web of influence that shapes not just your life, but the lives of everyone you subsequently encounter. She began to see her past friendships not as losses to mourn, but as foundations that continued to support her current life. The friend who had moved had taught her about resilience, and that lesson now helped her support others going through similar challenges. The divorced couple had shown her the importance of honesty in relationships, and that wisdom now informed how she approached conflict resolution. Every person who had passed through her life had left gifts that kept giving, even long after the active relationship had ended. But the most profound realization came when she understood that this network of influence worked in both directions. Just as others had shaped her, She had undoubtedly influenced countless people in ways she would never know. The kindness she'd learned from one friend was now being expressed to new friends who would carry it forward to their own relationships. The very approach to friendship she'd developed, allowing connections to evolve rather than demanding they remain static, was being modeled for others struggling with changing relationships. This understanding completely transformed her relationship with aging and friendship. Instead of feeling like she was constantly losing connections, she began to feel part of an ever-expanding network of influence and love. Instead of mourning friendships that had changed form, she became curious about new connections that were always emerging. Instead of trying to hold on to people, she focused on being the kind of person others would want to connect with. The Buddha taught that understanding interdependence leads to boundless compassion, the recognition that we are all part of one interconnected web of existence. When you truly grasp this truth, it becomes impossible to feel isolated or abandoned, even when specific relationships change or end. You understand that you are always connected, always influencing and being influenced, always part of something much larger than any individual friendship. Every person you've ever cared about, she would tell others struggling with changing friendships, is still with you in the ways that matter most. Their influence on who you've become, the love they showed you, the lessons they taught you, these don't disappear when the relationship changes form. And the love you gave them continues to ripple outward through their lives and everyone they touch. Nothing is ever really lost. Everything just transforms. This understanding doesn't eliminate the sadness that comes with relationship changes, but it does eliminate the deeper suffering that comes from believing those changes represent fundamental loss or failure. Instead, they represent the natural evolution of love itself, always changing form, always finding new expressions, always connecting us to the vast network of human experience. But this wisdom about relationships is just one part of a larger transformation that happens as we age. Because as we learn to let go of trying to control our connections with others, we also begin to question our attachment to productivity and achievement. And that questioning opens the door to perhaps the most liberating discovery of all, that your worth as a human being has nothing to do with what you accomplish. And that's where our journey takes us next. In a gleaming office tower, there worked an executive who had built her entire identity around one simple equation. The more she accomplished, the more valuable she became as a human being. For 30 years, this formula had served her well. Her days began at 5 in the morning and ended near midnight with strategic planning. She measured each day's worth by the number of items she could cross off her ever-expanding task list. But then, something began to change. The 20-hour workdays that had once energized her started leaving her exhausted. The complex problems she used to solve with sharp focus now required more time and mental effort. The physical stamina that had always seemed infinite began showing very real limits. At first, she responded the only way she knew how, by trying harder. She optimized everything from her morning routine to her email management system. But despite all these efforts, her output began to decline, and for the first time in decades, she felt like she was falling behind. The turning point came when she found herself working 18-hour days just to maintain what used to be her normal level of productivity. One evening, she collapsed in her office chair, and asked herself a question that terrified her. If I can't do as much as I used to do, who am I? She realized that her entire sense of self had been built around being the person who could handle anything, solve any problem, outwork anyone. She had become so identified with her productivity that she couldn't imagine her own worth existing independently of her output. The thought of slowing down felt like the threat of becoming nobody at all. In desperation, she took something she'd never taken before, a real vacation at a quiet retreat center. The staff there seemed to move through life at a completely different pace, accomplishing their tasks without rushing, appearing genuinely content despite not seeming particularly driven or ambitious. On the third day, she struck up a conversation with the retreat center's gardener. She was curious about his productivity systems, how he managed such extensive gardens so beautifully. "I don't manage anything," he said with a gentle smile. "I just show up each day and do what the garden needs. Some days that means planting, some days pruning, some days just sitting quietly and observing what wants to grow." "But how do you measure your success?" she asked, genuinely puzzled. "Success isn't something I achieve," he said slowly. "It's something I participate in. The garden succeeds when I work in harmony with its natural rhythms, not when I force it to produce according to my timeline." This conversation introduced her to a Buddhist concept she'd never encountered, that worth and productivity are not only different things, but that confusing them is one of the primary sources of human suffering. The Buddha taught that attachment to results, to being valued for what we do rather than what we are, keeps us trapped in cycles of anxiety and dissatisfaction. The gardener invited her to observe the garden with him. "Which plant is most valuable?" he asked. "The roses that bloom spectacularly for a few weeks? The oak tree providing shade? The earthworms you can't see but whose work makes everything else possible?" She started to answer, then stopped. Comparing their value seemed to miss the point entirely. "The garden doesn't succeed because any individual plant is productive," he continued gently. "It succeeds because each element contributes what it naturally offers, when it's able to offer it. Human communities work the same way. Some contribute through visible achievements, others through quiet presence. All of it matters. None of it determines anyone's fundamental worth." This perspective shattered something inside her that had been tightly held for decades. She'd been living as if her humanity was conditional, something she had to earn through constant productivity. But what if her value as a person was simply inherent, unchanging, unrelated to any external measure of success? For the first time in 30 years, she spent an entire day doing nothing that could be measured or optimized. Instead of feeling empty or worthless, she felt peaceful, more present and alive than she'd felt in years. When she returned to work, she made a shocking decision. She reduced her schedule, delegated responsibilities, and began setting boundaries. Working fewer hours but with greater presence, she became more effective than during her 18-hour days. She discovered that much of what she'd called productivity had actually been busy work that didn't accomplish much. But the real transformation went deeper. She began to understand what the gardener had meant about participating in success rather than achieving it. Her worth wasn't something she created through constant effort. It was something she recognized and allowed to express itself naturally. The executive's transformation from doing to being wasn't immediate. For months, she found herself caught between measuring worth by productivity and glimpsing something different, value that existed independent of achievement. The breakthrough came during a Tuesday afternoon meeting with department heads locked in conflict over resources. In her previous approach, she would have dominated the conversation and pushed for quick decisions. But something different happened. Instead of rushing towards solutions, she found herself simply present, listening deeply, holding space for frustration, allowing silences without filling them with her own ideas. The shift in the room was palpable. Department heads began listening to each other instead of waiting to speak. Defensive postures softened. Creative solutions emerged naturally. By meeting's end, they had resolved the conflict and discovered collaborative possibilities no one had considered. What struck her was that she had done very little in terms of traditional productive actions. Her primary contribution had been her quality of presence, creating space where others could access their own wisdom. This introduced her to what Buddhists call effortless action, accomplishing what needs to be accomplished, not through force, but through alignment with natural flow and skilled responsiveness to what each moment requires. The Buddha taught that attachment to being the doer is actually an illusion that creates suffering. We are participants in an interconnected web, and the most skillful way to live is to align ourselves with what wants to emerge rather than forcing outcomes. She began experimenting with bringing this presence to other situations. A struggling team member opened up about personal challenges when she simply listened without offering immediate solutions. A complex business problem resolved when she created space for creative thinking rather than imposing her ideas. Her relationship with her daughter deepened when she stopped trying to help and started being available. But the most profound shift happened in her relationship with herself. She began experiencing what it felt like to exist without constantly doing or producing something. She discovered that underneath all her activity was a deeper aliveness, a consciousness that was inherently valuable, inherently enough. This led her to explore meditation, something she'd always dismissed as unproductive. In those periods of sitting quietly, she wasn't accomplishing anything measurable, yet consistently emerged, feeling more centered, creative, and capable of skillful response. "I'm finally understanding," she told the gardener during a return visit, "that I spent 30 years trying to justify my existence through activity. But my existence doesn't need justification. It just is. And when I stop trying to prove my worth and start being present, everything becomes more alive." The gardener smiled. "You've discovered what the Buddha called original nature, awareness that exists before all the stories we tell ourselves about who we need to be. This awareness doesn't age, doesn't become more or less valuable based on what we do. It's the foundation that makes all activity possible." This became the foundation of her being revolution, a complete reorientation toward quality of consciousness rather than quantity of output. The results transformed not just her work effectiveness, but all her relationships and her own well-being. Most importantly, She no longer feared aging the same way. If her worth didn't depend on maintaining peak productivity forever, then physical changes didn't threaten her fundamental value. 6 months later, the executive faced a company crisis that traditional problem-solving couldn't resolve. A major client was threatening to leave, and every solution only made things worse. On impulse, she reached out to her predecessor, a woman who had retired 5 years earlier. Over coffee, the executive explained all the strategies they'd tried. Instead of offering tactics, the older woman asked simply, "What are you not seeing in this situation?" "We've analyzed every angle," the executive began. "Sometimes when we're focused on solving problems, we miss what's really happening underneath them," the older woman said gently. "Tell me about the person who's threatening to leave. Not the business reasons, but what you sense about their actual experience." As the executive described the client, something shifted in her understanding. She realized the business conflict was masking deeper concerns about trust and feeling valued. The client wasn't just unhappy with service delivery, he was feeling unheard and unimportant. "The solution isn't in your business processes," the older woman smiled. "It's in your relationship. This person needs to feel genuinely seen, not just managed." The conversation revealed insights that came not from current market knowledge, but from decades of observing human nature and recognizing patterns that repeat across contexts. The older woman had developed wisdom, the ability to see beyond surface problems to underlying truths. The executive resolved the crisis by listening to the client as a human being rather than treating him as a business transaction. This experience opened her eyes to an entire economy of wisdom operating in the world. Older adults who possessed insights incredibly valuable but rarely recognized. She began seeking conversations with people who had accumulated decades of experience. A retired teacher helped her communicate complex ideas. A former social worker offered perspective on conflict resolution. An elderly neighbor provided insights into patience and long-term thinking that revolutionized her strategic planning. The Buddha taught about 4 stages of life, the later stages involving stepping back from worldly competition to focus on wisdom and service. This isn't retirement as irrelevance, but graduation to a different contribution, one based on being rather than doing, understanding rather than producing. The executive began envisioning aging into this kind of wisdom, rather than trying to maintain youthful productivity forever. She imagined offering something younger colleagues couldn't provide: deep pattern recognition from witnessing many cycles, emotional intelligence from decades of relationships, perspective from seeing how urgent problems resolve over time. This vision transformed her relationship with aging. Instead of seeing her future as gradual decline from peak productivity, she anticipated evolution toward a different kind of value, one that might be more meaningful than anything achieved through sheer effort. She started preparing by cultivating qualities that would make her wisdom valuable, practicing deep listening, developing pattern recognition, learning to offer guidance without attachment to outcomes. Most importantly, she understood that the wisdom economy wasn't just for when she was much older. She could begin participating immediately. "I finally understand why some cultures revere their elders," she reflected to the gardener. "It's recognition of irreplaceable wisdom they've accumulated, wisdom that can't be Googled, only earned through patient accumulation of life experience." This understanding prepared her for the next phase, confronting the deepest questions about mortality and what it means to live a truly fulfilling life. Because as liberating as discovering worth beyond productivity was, she was about to encounter teachings that would challenge her understanding of existence itself. And that's where we turn next, to the ultimate teacher that comes to us all, and the profound gifts it offers to those brave enough to listen. High in the mountains of Tibet, there existed a village where something extraordinary happened every day. The inhabitants began each morning not with coffee or breakfast, but with a simple acknowledgement: today I am alive, and someday I will not be. To outsiders, this might sound morbid, but the people in this village were among the most joyful, present, and deeply connected human beings anyone had ever encountered. They had learned something that most of the world spends enormous energy trying to avoid: how to live in conscious partnership with their own mortality. This wasn't a village obsessed with death, but a community that had discovered how awareness of life's temporary nature could transform every moment into something precious beyond measure. The practice had begun generations earlier, when a Buddhist teacher arrived during a difficult winter. Many people had fallen ill, and the villagers were consumed with fear about who might die next. They spent their days worrying, trying to protect themselves from the inevitable, living in constant anxiety about loss. "You are already dead," the teacher told them during a gathering in the village center. The villagers gasped, thinking this was some kind of curse. "You are so afraid of dying that you have forgotten to live. You are walking through your days like ghosts, missing the extraordinary gift of being alive because you're terrified of the day that gift will end." He introduced them to what Buddhists call death meditation, not a gloomy contemplation of endings, but a practice of using mortality awareness to wake up to life itself. "When you truly understand that this day might be your last," he explained, "you stop wasting time on petty concerns. When you really grasp that your loved ones are temporary gifts, you pay attention to them with your whole heart. When you accept that nothing lasts forever, everything becomes infinitely more precious." The Buddha taught extensively about maranasati, mindfulness of death. This practice isn't about becoming morbid or fearful. It's about using the reality of impermanence as a teacher that shows us what truly matters. When you understand that you have a limited number of days, you naturally begin to choose how to spend them more wisely. The villagers began experimenting with this teaching. Each morning, they would sit quietly and reflect on the simple truth that this day was not guaranteed, that everyone they loved was temporary, that every experience was unrepeatable. Instead of creating anxiety, this practice began to generate something unexpected: profound gratitude and presence. When you know your time with someone is limited, you listen differently. When you understand that any conversation might be among your last, you speak more honestly. When you grasp that every sunrise is part of a finite collection, you actually notice the sky. The villagers discovered that consciousness of death wasn't the enemy of happiness. It was the source of deeper appreciation for everything that was still possible. One village elder became the practice's most eloquent advocate. "I spent the first 60 years of my life trying to pretend I would live forever," she would tell visitors. "I postponed joy, delayed difficult conversations, and took every ordinary moment for granted. But when I finally befriended the reality of my own death, I started truly living for the first time. Death meditation doesn't make you think about dying, she explained. It makes you think about living, really living, not just existing. It asks you to consider what you would do if you knew you had 1 year left, 1 month left, 1 week left. And then it encourages you to start doing some of those things now, while you still can. The practice they developed was beautifully simple. Each evening, families would gather and share 3 things: something they were grateful for that day, something they wanted to express while they still could, and something they wanted to let go of because life was too short to carry it. Children grew up understanding that love was meant to be expressed freely because tomorrow was never guaranteed. Perhaps most remarkably, this transformed their relationship with aging. Instead of seeing each passing year as a loss, they began to view it as an achievement. Another year of experiences gathered, relationships deepened, wisdom accumulated. Grey hair became evidence of having lived long enough to acquire it. Wrinkles became proof of having had enough experiences to mark the face with their memory. When death did come to the village, something beautiful happened. Because everyone had been living with conscious awareness of mortality, grief was profound but not devastating. People mourned deeply because they had loved fully, but they didn't carry the additional burden of regret for words unspoken or time squandered. They had been practicing saying goodbye a little bit every day. The Buddhist understanding of death as teacher rather than enemy completely transforms how we age. When you accept that your time is finite, every year becomes precious rather than threatening. When you understand that your loved ones are temporary gifts, you appreciate them more rather than taking them for granted. When you grasp that your existence is a brief candle flame, that flame burns brighter, not dimmer. The villagers had learned what the Buddha taught, that understanding impermanence is not a source of suffering, but the end of a particular kind of suffering, the suffering that comes from trying to make permanent what is naturally temporary. When you stop fighting against the fundamental nature of existence, you can finally begin to dance with it. But this wisdom about mortality reveals something even more profound about the nature of love itself. In the same mountain village, there lived a woman named Pema, who had been married to her husband Tenzin for 47 years, when he died quietly in his sleep one winter morning. According to conventional wisdom, Pema should have been devastated, lost, perhaps even broken by such a profound loss. And indeed, she grieved deeply. She wept. She missed him terribly. She felt the sharp absence of his physical presence every day. But something remarkable happened as the months passed. Instead of feeling like she had lost everything, she began to discover that in some mysterious way, she had lost nothing at all. This wasn't denial of her grief. It was a profound recognition of something the Buddha taught about the nature of love itself, that genuine love doesn't depend on physical form for its continued existence. Love, in its purest essence, is not something we possess or something that can be taken away. It's something we participate in, something that flows through us and continues, flowing long after the bodies that channeled it have returned to dust. People ask me if I miss Tenzin, Pema would tell visitors. Of course I miss his physical presence, his laugh, his warm hands, the way he hummed while making tea. I would give anything to have one more conversation with him. But missing his form is different from losing his love. She would gesture to her heart. The love we shared didn't exist in his body or in my body. It existed in the space between us, in the connection we created together. And that connection, that love, it's still here. It has changed form, but it hasn't disappeared. This understanding came from years of Buddhist practice that had taught her to distinguish between attachment and love. Attachment says, I love you, therefore you must stay exactly as you are forever. Love says, I love you, therefore I want you to be free, even if that freedom means changing form. Attachment creates suffering when things inevitably change. Love creates gratitude and continues creating beauty even after time has ended. Pema began to notice that Tenzin's love was still actively present in her life, just expressing itself differently. Every act of kindness she performed carried the influence of his gentle nature. Every moment of patience she practiced reflected what his presence had taught her. His love was still moving through the world, through her, through the people they had influenced together. I used to think that when someone dies, their love dies with them, she explained to a young couple seeking guidance after losing a parent. But I've learned that love is like water. It can exist as ice, as liquid, as vapor, many different forms, but always still water. Tenzin's love for me has changed from the liquid of daily presence to the vapor of memory and influence, but it's still the same love. This perspective transformed how she understood the entire purpose of relationships. She realized that the goal of loving someone isn't to keep them with you forever, in the same form, but to allow that love to transform you both in ways that continue creating beauty long after the original relationship has changed. Every person we love leaves deposits of their essence within us that become permanent parts of who we are. The Buddha taught about karmic imprints, the way every interaction leaves lasting impressions that continue to influence our thoughts, behaviors, and capacity for compassion. When someone we love dies, their physical form disappears, but the karmic imprints of their love remain active within us, continuing to shape how we move through the world. Pema began to see that her grief itself was a form of love expressing itself. The sadness she felt wasn't evidence that something precious had been lost forever, but proof that something precious had been received so completely that its absence could be felt this deeply. Grief is love, learning to find new places to go, she would say. She started a practice adopted by others in the village. Every morning, she would spend a few minutes in meditation, connecting with the love she had shared with Tenzin and asking how that love wanted to express itself through her actions that day. Should she visit the sick neighbor Tenzin, always worried about? Should she practice the patience with difficult people that he had always modeled? Love doesn't die, she discovered. It just looks for new hands to work through, new hearts to express itself through, new ways to create connection and healing in the world. When I act from the love Tenzin and I shared, he's still loving through me. This understanding completely reframed her experience of aging and the losses that come with it. Every person she had loved who had died was still contributing to who she was becoming. She wasn't becoming more alone as people left her life. She was becoming a more complete expression of everyone she had ever loved. This is why older people can seem so wise, she reflected. We carry so many loves within us. We've learned from so many hearts. We become like libraries of love, repositories of all the different ways we've learned to connect with others. When asked if carrying all those losses hurt, Pema smiled. It hurts, and it heals at the same time. Yes, I miss the physical presence of everyone I've loved who has died. But I've learned that missing someone is just another way of loving them. And love, real love, doesn't diminish when it's shared across time and space, and even death. It multiplies. Death doesn't end love, it transforms it. Grief doesn't mean love was lost. It means love was so complete that its absence creates an echo that continues to resonate through everything that remains. And every person we love who dies becomes a teacher about the indestructible nature of genuine connection. As word of Pema's wisdom spread, people began making pilgrimages to learn from her understanding of love and death. Among these visitors was a businessman approaching his 60th birthday with a consuming question: how do I make sure my life matters? Pema listened as he spoke about his fear that he hadn't accomplished enough, hadn't made a significant enough mark on the world. He was considering grand gestures, large charitable donations, buildings with his name on them, foundations that would carry his memory into the future. When he finished speaking, Pema asked a simple question: tell me about the person who most influenced your life. The businessman thought immediately of his elementary school teacher, Mrs. Chen. She saw something in me that no one else saw, he said, his voice softening. I was a struggling student, but she believed I was capable of more than I thought possible. She spent extra time helping me, never made me feel stupid, and taught me that learning was about curiosity, not just getting right answers. Did she have buildings named after her? Pema asked gently. Did she start a foundation? No, the businessman replied. She was just a teacher who cared about her students. But everything I accomplished came from the confidence she helped me develop. Every time I saw potential in someone else, I was passing on what she had given me. Pema smiled. So, this teacher, who probably never thought she was creating a legacy, influenced not just you, but everyone you've ever encouraged, everyone you've ever believed in. Her legacy didn't require monuments. It required only genuine care for the people in front of her. This conversation revealed something the businessman had never considered. He was already creating a legacy, had been creating it every day of his life without realizing it. Every employee he had mentored carried his influence forward. Every act of kindness he had performed had taught someone else that kindness was possible. Every time he had chosen integrity over profit, he had modeled that success could be achieved without compromising values. The Buddha taught that our actions create karmic seeds, influences that continue to bear fruit long after the original action is completed. Every word we speak with compassion plants seeds of compassion in the hearts of those who hear it. Every gesture of patience teaches others about the possibility of patience. Every moment we choose love over fear, we're contributing to the sum total of love in the world. You think legacy is something you create at the end of your life, Pema told the businessman. But legacy is something you're creating with every breath, every choice, every interaction. The question isn't whether you'll leave a legacy. You already are leaving one. The question is, what kind of legacy you're choosing to leave? She invited him to consider the ripple effects of ordinary moments. The time he had listened patiently to a frustrated employee had taught that person about the value of being heard. The day he had admitted a mistake publicly had shown others that strength could include vulnerability. The countless small acts of consideration throughout his career had influenced how those around him learned to treat each other. The people who worry most about being remembered often focus on grand gestures, Pema explained. But the people who are most remembered, most influential, most genuinely impactful, are usually those who focus simply on loving well in the moments they were given. The businessman began to understand that aging didn't diminish his capacity to create legacy, it enhanced it. With each passing year, he had accumulated more wisdom to share, more understanding to offer, more perspective to contribute. His legacy wasn't something he needed to build in the future. It was something he was building every day simply by choosing to live with intention, compassion, and authenticity. The most powerful legacy you can leave, Pema concluded, is the example of how to live with awareness, kindness, and courage in the face of life's inevitable changes. When people see someone aging with grace, accepting physical changes without bitterness, facing mortality without terror, choosing love over fear, that becomes a teaching more powerful than any monument. The businessman returned home with a completely different understanding of his remaining years. Instead of focusing on grand gestures to ensure his memory, he began paying attention to the quality of presence he brought to ordinary interactions. Instead of worrying about what he would leave behind, he became interested in what he could give right now. This is the ultimate teaching that mortality offers to those brave enough to listen. Your life is already meaningful, your influence is already spreading, your legacy is already being written. The invitation of aging is not to accomplish more, but to recognize the profound impact you're already having, simply by choosing to live with increasing wisdom, compassion, and presence. Every day you wake up is another opportunity to contribute to the great web of connection that links all beings across time and space, and even death itself. And recognizing this truth prepares us for the final integration, understanding how all these teachings come together to create a completely new way of moving through the years ahead. There was a woman who had spent most of her adult life waking up angry. Not dramatically angry, just the low-level irritation that comes from immediately checking the news, scrolling through social media, and mentally cataloguing everything that needed to be worried about that day. Her mornings began with resistance to being awake, resentment about getting older, and anxiety about all the ways her body might disappoint her. She had developed what she called aging dread, a daily practice of noticing everything that hurt, moved more slowly, or looked different than it used to. Her mirror became a daily confrontation with loss. Her calendar became a countdown to decline. Her very awakening each morning felt like another step toward an inevitable ending she desperately wanted to avoid. This continued for years, until the day she encountered an elderly monk at a local meditation center. He appeared to be well into his 80s, moved slowly but gracefully, and radiated a kind of contentment that seemed impossible given his obvious physical limitations. During a brief conversation after meditation, she asked him how he stayed so peaceful despite what she assumed must be the frustrations of aging. Every morning, he said simply. "I practice the 3 recognitions. This practice has transformed my relationship with waking up, with aging, and with being alive. Would you like to learn it?" The 3 recognitions, he explained, were based on ancient Buddhist teachings about how to begin each day in harmony with reality rather than in conflict with it. The practice was deceptively simple, requiring only a few minutes each morning, but it had the power to completely reframe how someone experienced their entire day and their entire life. The first recognition, the monk explained, is recognition of awakeness. Before you even open your eyes, before you move or speak or think about what you need to do, simply notice that you are aware. Consciousness has returned to your body. The miracle of being alive is happening again. Instead of taking this for granted, spend 30 seconds in pure appreciation for the extraordinary fact that you exist, that you can experience this moment. The woman was skeptical. This seemed too simple, too positive, too removed from the practical realities of aging. But the monk's presence was so compelling that she decided to experiment. The next morning, instead of immediately reaching for her phone or starting her mental worry list, she lay still for a moment and simply noticed that she was awake, aware, alive. Something unexpected happened. For those 30 seconds, she wasn't an aging woman with problems and limitations. She was simply consciousness itself, aware and present, connected to the same mysterious aliveness that animates everything in the universe. It was the first time in years that she had begun a day feeling grateful instead of anxious. The second recognition, the monk had continued, is recognition of impermanence. This might sound dark, but it's actually liberating. As you become fully awake, remind yourself that this day will never come again. This particular configuration of circumstances, relationships, and possibilities is completely unique. Every person you encounter today might be someone you never see again. Every conversation might be unrepeatable. Every sunset might be among your final collection. The woman discovered that this recognition didn't create sadness. It created urgency in the most beautiful sense. When she really understood that today was irreplaceable, she naturally began to pay more attention to it. She found herself listening more carefully to conversations, noticing small beauties she usually missed, expressing appreciation she usually kept to herself. Impermanence wasn't stealing her joy, it was intensifying it. The third recognition, the monk concluded, is recognition of interconnection. Before you rise from bed, spend a moment acknowledging that you are not separate from the web of life around you. Your breath connects you to every plant on earth. Your consciousness connects you to every other aware being. Your very existence is possible only because of countless other lives. The farmers who grew your food, the people who built your shelter, the teachers who shaped your understanding. You are not aging alone. You are aging as part of a vast community of beings, all supporting each other, all connected in ways you can barely imagine. This third recognition transformed her relationship with loneliness and isolation. Even when she was physically alone, she began to feel held by an invisible network of connection that extended across time and space. Her individual aging became part of a much larger story, the story of consciousness itself, exploring what it means to live in temporary physical forms. The Buddha taught that how we begin each day determines the quality of everything that follows. If we start with resistance, complaint, and fear, we spend the day reinforcing those patterns. But if we start with awareness, acceptance, and appreciation, we create momentum toward peace that carries us through whatever challenges arise. After practicing the 3 recognitions for several months, the woman realized that something fundamental had shifted. She was still aging, still experiencing physical changes, still facing the same life challenges. But she was no longer fighting against her experience. She was dancing with it. Her mornings had become launching pads for days filled with presence rather than resistance, gratitude rather than grievance, connection rather than isolation. "I used to wake up every day feeling like life was happening to me," she told a friend. "Now I wake up feeling like I'm participating in life. The difference is everything." But the monk had taught her that morning practice was only half of what he called the daily revolution. How we end each day is equally important and equally transformative. The evening practice he shared would complete the circle, creating a rhythm of awareness that could transform not just individual days, but entire decades of living. And that evening practice held secrets that would surprise her completely. The elderly monk had warned her that the evening practice might be more challenging than the morning one. "In the morning," he had said, "we're fresh, hopeful, ready to begin again. But in the evening, we carry the weight of the day, the mistakes we made, the opportunities we missed, the ways we fell short of our intentions. The evening practice teaches us how to complete each day with grace rather than regret." He called it the 3 completions, and it was designed to help people end each day in harmony with Buddhist principles of acceptance, learning, and preparation for whatever comes next. Like the morning practice, it required only a few minutes, but its effects accumulated over time, creating what he described as a peaceful relationship with the passage of time itself. The first completion, the monk explained, is completion of gratitude. Before you analyze what went wrong today, before you plan tomorrow, before you judge your performance, spend time acknowledging what you received. Not just the obvious gifts, food, shelter, safety, but the subtle ones. The moment of sunlight that caught your attention, the smile from a stranger, the fact that your heart kept beating without your conscious effort, the opportunity to learn something new about yourself or the world. The woman began practicing this first completion and discovered something remarkable. When she focused on what she had received rather than what she had achieved, every day became abundant rather than insufficient. Even difficult days contained gifts when she looked for them carefully. A challenging conversation became an opportunity to practice patience. A physical discomfort became a teacher about the body's signals. A moment of sadness became evidence of her capacity to feel deeply. Gratitude practice isn't about pretending everything is perfect, the monk had cautioned. It's about developing eyes that can see gifts even in difficult circumstances. This skill becomes increasingly important as we age, because life naturally includes more challenges, more losses, more things that don't go according to our plans. The person who can find something to appreciate in any day is the person who can age with joy instead of bitterness. The second completion, he continued, is completion of learning. Every day offers lessons about life, relationships, your own patterns, and the nature of existence. But most people miss these lessons because they're too busy judging their experiences rather than learning from them. Before sleep, ask yourself, what did today teach me? What did I discover about myself? What did I learn about others? How did I grow, even in small ways? This practice transformed the woman's relationship with mistakes and difficulties. Instead of ending days with self-criticism and regret, she began ending them with curiosity and appreciation for her own growth. The conversation where she lost her patience became a lesson about her triggers and an opportunity to practice different responses in the future. The day she felt overwhelmed became insight into her limits and the importance of setting boundaries. Even physical pain became a teacher about acceptance and the art of working skillfully with discomfort. When you approach every experience as a potential teacher, the monk had said, you stop being a victim of your circumstances and become a student of life itself. This is especially powerful for older adults who have accumulated enough experience to recognize patterns and extract wisdom from situations that might have simply frustrated them when they were younger. The third completion, the monk concluded, is completion of release. This is the practice of letting go of the day completely before moving into sleep. Release any regrets about what you didn't accomplish. Release any resentments about how others treated you. Release any anxiety about tomorrow. Complete the day by returning to the same awareness you began with, the simple recognition that you are alive, connected, and held by something larger than your individual concerns. This third completion proved to be the most challenging and the most transformative. The woman discovered that she had been carrying unfinished emotional business from each day into the next, creating an accumulating burden of unresolved feelings. Learning to consciously release each day allowed her to wake up fresh rather than weighed down by yesterday's concerns. Sleep becomes different when you practice conscious release, she observed after several weeks. Instead of tossing and turning with worries, I fall asleep feeling complete. Instead of waking up tired from processing yesterday's stress, I wake up rested and ready for whatever today offers. The Buddha taught extensively about what he called sati, mindful awareness that encompasses both memory and presence. The evening practice of completion develops this quality by helping us remember the day clearly without getting lost in regret or fantasy, and then releasing that memory so we can be fully present to whatever comes next. But perhaps the most profound effect of the evening practice was how it changed her relationship with aging itself. When each day is consciously completed with gratitude, learning, and release, the accumulation of days becomes a source of richness rather than loss. Each evening becomes evidence of another day fully lived, another opportunity seized, another step in the journey of awakening. I used to dread the passing of time, she reflected to the monk during one of their conversations. Now I feel like I'm accumulating treasure, not material wealth, but wealth of experience, wisdom, and appreciation. Each day that passes makes me richer, not poorer. The monk smiled. This is the beginning of what we call the ripple effect. When one person transforms their relationship with aging, it affects everyone around them. Your peaceful presence becomes a teaching for others who are struggling with their own fears about getting older. Your daily revolution becomes part of a larger transformation. And indeed, she was beginning to notice that her new approach to daily living was creating changes that extended far beyond her own experience. 6 months after beginning her daily practice of the 3 recognitions and 3 completions, the woman started noticing something unexpected happening around her. People began commenting on a change in her presence, not just how she looked, but how she felt to be around. "There's something different about you," her adult daughter observed during a visit. "You seem more settled, more at peace with yourself." What the woman didn't realize was that her daily revolution was creating what Buddhists call merit, positive influence, that naturally flows from mindful living and affects everyone in its vicinity. Her morning practice of awareness, impermanence, and interconnection was changing not just how she experienced her days, but how others experienced her. Her evening practice of gratitude, learning, and release was creating a quality of presence that felt both calming and inspiring to those around her. The first person to be significantly affected was her neighbor, an anxious man in his 60s who had been dreading his upcoming retirement. He had watched her transformation with curiosity, noting how she seemed to move through her daily routines with more ease and contentment than before. Finally, he asked her what had changed. When she shared the simple practices the monk had taught her, something clicked for him. "I've been treating every day like a problem to solve," he realized. "But you're treating every day like a gift to receive." He began experimenting with the 3 recognitions, starting each morning with awareness of being alive, rather than immediate worry about his declining career prospects. Within weeks, his wife noticed the change. "He's not as agitated in the mornings," she told the woman during a chance encounter at the grocery store. "He seems more present, more grateful for small things. Whatever you've been doing, it's working for him too." This pattern began repeating with other people in her life. Her book club members started asking about her newfound serenity during discussions that used to stress her. Her exercise class noticed that she approached physical limitations with curiosity rather than frustration. Even casual acquaintances began seeking her out for conversations, drawn to a quality of presence they couldn't quite name, but found deeply comforting. The woman realized she was witnessing something the Buddha had taught about extensively, that inner transformation naturally creates outer transformation. When one person stops fighting against the reality of aging and begins embracing it as a spiritual practice, that shift in consciousness affects the entire community around them. Peace is contagious. Acceptance is influential. Wisdom shared through example often has more impact than wisdom shared through words. But the most profound ripple effect occurred with her relationship to her own adult children. For years, she had unconsciously been modeling anxiety about aging, complaining about physical changes, worrying aloud about the future, expressing resentment about limitations. Her children had absorbed these attitudes, developing their own fears about getting older based on watching her struggle with the process. Now, however, she was modeling something completely different, the possibility of aging with grace, curiosity, and deepening wisdom. Her daughter, who had been dreading her own 40th birthday, watched her mother navigate daily challenges with equanimity and began to reconsider her assumptions about what getting older meant. "You're showing me that aging doesn't have to be about loss," she told her mother. "It can be about becoming more yourself." Her son, who had been avoiding visits because her previous negativity about aging had triggered his own mortality fears, started calling more frequently. "You seem more interesting now," he admitted during one conversation. "More engaged with life, more curious about things. It makes me look forward to my own later years instead of dreading them." This intergenerational impact revealed something crucial about the social dimensions of aging. How we age doesn't just affect our own experience. It teaches everyone around us what's possible in their own aging process. When we age with bitterness and resistance, we contribute to a culture that fears getting older. When we age with awareness and acceptance, we contribute to a culture that honors the entire span of human life. The elderly monk, when she shared these observations with him, nodded knowingly. "This is why Buddhist communities have always revered their elders," he explained. "Not just out of respect for their years, but in recognition of their role as teachers about how to live skillfully in every stage of life." When older adults practice awareness, younger people learn that aging can be a path of awakening rather than decline. He encouraged her to think beyond even this immediate circle of influence. Every person you've touched with your peaceful presence will carry that influence into their own relationships, he said. Your neighbor will treat his own aging parents differently. Your children will approach their own life transitions with more wisdom. Your friends will consider possibilities for their later years they never imagined before. This is how consciousness changes, one awakened person at a time, creating ripples that spread far beyond what any individual can track. The woman began to understand that her daily revolution wasn't just personal, it was political in the deepest sense. In a culture that devalues aging and worships youth, choosing to age consciously and joyfully was an act of rebellion. In a society that equates worth with productivity, finding meaning in being rather than doing was revolutionary. In a world that fears mortality, embracing the full cycle of life was a form of leadership. I started this practice to feel better about my own aging, she reflected to the monk during their final scheduled conversation. But I've discovered that I'm part of something much larger, a quiet revolution of consciousness that's changing how entire communities think about what it means to grow older. The monk smiled. This is how real change happens, he said. Not through grand gestures or dramatic announcements, but through individuals choosing to live differently, one day at a time. Your daily practice of awareness, gratitude, and release is contributing to a new understanding of aging that will benefit generations of people who haven't even been born yet. As she walked home from that final conversation, the woman felt the weight and joy of this responsibility. Every morning she chose awareness over anxiety. Every evening she chose gratitude over grievance. She was casting a vote for a different kind of world, one where aging was seen as a continuation of life's adventure rather than its ending. One where getting older was understood as an opportunity for deepening wisdom rather than diminishing worth. Her daily revolution had become part of a much larger transformation, the slow, quiet, profound shift in human consciousness that happens when enough people choose awakening over sleeping, acceptance over resistance, love over fear. And that transformation, she realized, was just beginning. The practices she had learned were not the end of the journey, but the foundation for everything that was yet to come. Because when you learn to live each day with full awareness, deep gratitude, and complete acceptance, you discover that aging isn't about approaching an ending at all. It's about stepping into the most profound beginning of all, the recognition of who you really are, beneath all the stories, all the changes, all the temporary forms that consciousness takes as it explores the mystery of being alive. And that recognition prepares us for the final understanding that brings all these teachings together. As our 3 hours together draw to a close, take a moment to notice what has shifted within you. Not just in your thoughts about aging, but in the very ground of your being. Something has been quietly transforming as we've journeyed through these ancient teachings together. Something that goes far deeper than new ideas or different perspectives. You began this journey perhaps carrying the weight of cultural messages about aging, that it represents decline, loss, irrelevance, the slow dimming of life's light. You may have arrived here with your own fears about changing bodies, shifting relationships, questions about purpose and meaning in later years. These concerns were not wrong or misguided. They were honest responses to living in a world that has forgotten some essential truths about the full span of human existence. But now, having walked through the village where people befriended their own mortality, having listened to the conversation between consciousness and its temporary physical home, having witnessed the potter whose trembling hands created more beautiful art than steady ones ever could, having discovered that relationships flow like rivers, always changing form but never truly ending, you carry different possibilities within you. The Buddha taught that enlightenment is not the acquisition of something new, but the recognition of what was always already present. And what we've been exploring together is exactly this kind of recognition, the awakening to truths that were always available, always true, always waiting for us to remember them. You have always been more than your physical form, though your culture may have taught you to identify completely with your body. You have always been connected to every other being through invisible threads of influence and interdependence, though you may have felt isolated and alone. You have always been accumulating wisdom with every experience, though you may have been taught to measure your worth only through external achievements. You have always been both temporary and eternal, temporary in form, eternal in the love you give and receive, the consciousness you embody, the ripples you create through simply being alive. These are not consolation prizes for getting older. These are not spiritual bypasses designed to help you feel better about inevitable decline. These are fundamental truths about the nature of existence that become more accessible, more obvious, more undeniably real as you accumulate years of lived experience. Aging doesn't diminish your access to these truths. It enhances it. Think about the person you were 20 years ago, 30 years ago, however many years you've been walking this path. That person had dreams and fears, strengths and limitations, a particular way of seeing the world. But was that person more you than you are now? Or have you been becoming more yourself with each passing year, more aware of your essential nature, more skilled at distinguishing between what truly matters and what merely seems important? The Buddhist understanding suggests that what we call aging is actually a process of revelation, the gradual unveiling of who we have always been beneath the layers of social conditioning, role-playing, and the desperate attempt to control outcomes that characterized our younger years. Every year that passes strips away another layer of illusion, another false belief about what we need to be happy, another assumption about where our worth comes from. This is why many wisdom traditions speak of elders as being closer to enlightenment, not because they're approaching death, but because they're approaching truth. The accumulated experience of living through many cycles of gain and loss, success and failure, connection and separation, gradually teaches what cannot be learned through books or theory. That happiness comes from accepting what is. That love transcends physical form. That meaning emerges from presence rather than productivity. But here's what might surprise you. This process of revelation doesn't wait until you're elderly to begin. It's happening right now, at whatever age you are, with every breath you take. Every challenge you face with awareness rather than resistance, every change you accept with grace rather than fighting, every moment you choose presence over the story your mind tells about that moment. All of this is the path of awakening that aging naturally supports. The practices we've explored, the mirror meditation that reveals beauty beyond surface appearance, the body dialogue that transforms your relationship with physical changes, the death meditation that intensifies appreciation for life, the daily recognitions and completions that turn ordinary time into sacred time. These are not techniques for coping with aging. They are methods for accelerating the very process that aging naturally facilitates. The return to your original nature, the recognition of your timeless essence, the remembrance of who you were before you learned to define yourself by external circumstances. This is why the title of our journey together speaks of transformation rather than mere acceptance. Buddhist teachings about aging don't ask you to resign yourself to inevitable decline or to pretend that physical changes don't matter. They invite you to discover that what you thought was decline might actually be refinement. What you thought was ending might actually be beginning. What you thought was loss might actually be liberation. The woman who learned to see her wrinkles as evidence of laughter and love didn't just change her opinion about her appearance. She awakened to a completely different understanding of what beauty means. The executive who discovered worth beyond productivity didn't just retire gracefully. She found a way of being that was more fulfilling than any achievement had ever been. The villagers who befriended death didn't just overcome their fear of mortality. They discovered how consciousness of impermanence could transform every moment into a gift. You now carry all of these discoveries within you. They are not stories you heard, but possibilities you've awakened to. They are not concepts you understand, but capacities you can develop. They are not distant ideals, but present realities waiting to be embodied in your own unique way, at your own particular stage of life, within your own specific circumstances. The infinite beginning we speak of is not some future state you'll achieve when you've perfected these practices or reached a certain age. It's the recognition that every moment offers the opportunity to begin again, to see with fresh eyes, to respond with wisdom instead of habit, to choose love over fear, presence over distraction, acceptance over resistance. This beginning is always available, but it becomes more obvious and more accessible as you release the illusion that your worth depends on maintaining any particular version of yourself. And that release, that profound letting go of who you thought you had to be in order to matter, that is perhaps the greatest gift that conscious aging offers to the world. As we prepare to part ways, I want to offer you something that Buddhist teachers have shared with students for over 2,000 years. Not instructions or techniques, but a blessing that acknowledges what you already are and supports what you're becoming. May you remember, in every moment of doubt about your changing body, that you are consciousness temporarily wearing physical form, not physical form temporarily experiencing consciousness. May you see your reflection with the same loving awareness you would bring to witnessing a sunset, appreciating its beauty, not despite its impermanence, but because of it. May you approach each physical change not as evidence of decline, but as your body's wisdom expressing itself in new ways. May you listen to its messages with respect rather than resentment, responding to its needs with kindness rather than criticism. May you discover that what the world calls limitation might actually be invitation, to move more mindfully, rest more deeply, choose more carefully what deserves your precious energy. May your relationships flow like water, sometimes rushing together in rapids of shared experience, sometimes meandering apart through different territories, always part of the same vast river of connection that links every heart to every other heart across time and space. May you love without clinging, appreciate without possessing, grieve without forgetting that love itself never dies, only changes form. May you release the exhausting burden of proving your worth through constant productivity. May you discover the profound value of simply being present, fully aware, genuinely kind. May you understand that your life's greatest contributions might come not through dramatic achievements, but through the accumulated effect of choosing consciousness over unconsciousness, compassion over indifference, curiosity over judgment in countless ordinary moments. May you befriend the reality of your own mortality, not as a morbid obsession, but as the teacher that reveals what truly matters. May the knowledge that your time is finite inspire you to spend it more wisely, love more freely, express more honestly, forgive more quickly. May you see each day not as one day closer to ending, but as one day deeper into the mystery of being alive. May you understand that every person whose life has touched yours continues to live within you through the love they shared, the wisdom they offered, the ways they shaped who you've become. May you recognize that your own influence ripples forward through every life you touch, creating waves of healing and awakening that will spread far beyond anything you can imagine or track. May you trust that your legacy is being written not through grand gestures, but through the quality of presence you bring to each encounter. May your mornings begin with gratitude for the miracle of awareness returning to your body. May your days unfold with appreciation for the unrepeatable gift of this particular collection of moments. May your evenings close with forgiveness for whatever you couldn't accomplish and recognition of how you grew through whatever you experienced. May you sleep in peace and wake in wonder, again and again, for all the days remaining to you. Above all, may you remember that aging is not something that happens to you, it is something that reveals you. Each year that passes doesn't diminish who you are, it clarifies who you are. Every change you experience doesn't represent loss of your true self. It represents the shedding of everything that was never your true self to begin with. You are not becoming older. You are becoming truer. You are not moving toward an ending. You are moving toward the infinite beginning that has always been waiting for you to recognize it. You are not declining in value. You are appreciating in wisdom, depth, and the kind of beauty that only emerges through the patient accumulation of conscious experience. This journey we've shared together ends here, but your journey continues with every breath. You carry within you now not just new ideas about aging, but new possibilities for being human. You have touched something timeless within yourself that was never young, will never be old, and is always perfectly, completely, radiantly alive. Trust this. Rest in this. Live from this. The path ahead is luminous, with potential you haven't even begun to imagine. Your deepest adventures, your most profound discoveries, your greatest contributions to the healing of this world may all lie ahead of you, waiting to emerge as you continue to age with increasing awareness, acceptance, and love. This is not the end of anything. This is the infinite beginning. And you are ready.